Right now, above your head, there are roughly 100 volts for every meter of open air between you and the sky. That is not theory. It is a measured, persistent electrical field surrounding the entire planet. In the 1880s, engineers knew this. They did not just know it. They harvested it. Copper buried in dirt, wire stretched toward the clouds, telegraph lines running without a single battery. Then, quietly, all of it disappeared. Not because it failed, but because energy flowing freely from the earth and sky could not be metered, owned, or sold. And the reason why begins with the silence above you. Step outside on a clear day and the air itself is charged, quietly, invisibly. For every meter you rise above the ground, the potential difference between earth and sky grows by about 100 volts. This is not a guess or a legend. It is a measured fact, confirmed by instruments as old as Lord Kelvin's water drop electrometer in 1859, and as modern as field mills mounted on satellites. The number, about 100 volts per meter, isn't just a curiosity. It is the silent tension that wraps the planet day and night, a living circuit that never switches off. William Thomson, better known as Lord Kelvin, was among the first to catch this field in the act. In the late 1850s, he rigged a delicate glass tube to drip water from a rooftop, each drop picking up a charge as it fell. The faster the drops, the stronger the field. His notebooks, filled with columns of numbers and sketches of glassware, recorded values from 90 to 120 volts per meter above the sodden Glasgow earth. He worried about the leaks, currents seeping away through damp copper plates, or the slow drift of voltage lost to the air, but his results held. The field was real, and it was everywhere. The Carnegie Institution's global survey in the early 20th century traced this field across oceans and continents. Their ships logged the daily rise and fall, a midnight lull near 70 volts per meter, and a midday surge up to 130. The shape of the curve never changed, only its height, swayed by weather and the distant crackle of thunderstorms. Modern field mills, balloon probes, and even satellites still find the same gradient, with a global average of about 115 volts per meter in fair weather, drifting higher over dry land, lower over the sea. The global pattern endures. The math is simple, almost stark. V equals E times H. Voltage equals field strength times height. Lift a wire 10 meters, and you tap 1,000 volts between its tip and the ground. Raise it higher, and the number climbs. This is not a trick or a loophole. It is the baseline state of the world, the gentle pressure that quietly insists there is energy to be found, not in the burning of fuel, but in the space between your feet and the open sky. For centuries, this field has been measured, mapped, and for a brief moment, harvested. The question is not whether it exists, but what we chose to do with it. On the night of September 2nd, 1859, the familiar click of the telegraph sounder echoed through offices from Washington to Pittsburgh, but the batteries that usually powered those lines sat cold and disconnected on the workbench. Operators, seasoned by routine, kept their keys pressed down and watched in disbelief as messages still pulsed through the wires. The cause was not chemical, but atmospheric. A surge of energy from the sky itself, unleashed by what would later be called the Carrington event, the most powerful geomagnetic storm ever recorded. Telegraph logs from that night recorded the same urgent message, that the line worked without a battery and the aurora was bright as day. In Pittsburgh, the current was so fierce it scorched insulation and set sparks dancing across the operator's table. In Washington, a technician recorded that the instrument continued to click after the battery was wholly removed. The Baltimore Sun described how an operator, at first thinking it a fault, held the key down and found the line alive with fire. This was not a single freak occurrence. Over the next 2 decades, similar incidents appeared in Signal Corps field reports and the diaries of frontier clerks. During summer storms on the Mojave Line, the Earth itself seemed to hum with power. An entry from Fort Mojave notes that the battery was removed for cleaning and the line stayed active, the ground rod driven deeper, and the sounder clicks persisted. In Wyoming, a Union Pacific operator caught in a thunderstorm wrote that there was no battery, and still the messages came. The hardware was simple: iron or copper wire stretched for miles, glass insulators on wooden poles, a single ground plate sunk into wet soil. When the sky turned electric, these lines became antennas, gathering the planet's own pulse. Operators learned to recognize the signs: auroral glows, the sharp smell of ozone, the hair-raising tingle when touching the key. They developed procedures: disconnect the battery, close the circuit, listen for the clicks. If the line stayed live, they sent a test code: 2 quick taps, a pause, 2 more. If it came back, the storm was powering the line. Engineers debated the cause. Some blamed induction from the aurora, others pointed to telluric currents. Still others suspected the wires themselves were acting as giant capacitors, soaking up charge from the air. But the fact remained: the Earth and sky, under the right conditions, could do the work of a battery. For a brief moment, energy was free, and the telegraph, normally chained to rows of zinc and copper cells, ran on nothing but the silent forces moving through the world itself. These episodes did more than astonish the men at the keys. They seeded a question that would haunt the next generation of inventors. If the Earth's own electricity could drive a message across a continent, what else might it power if only someone found the right way to tap it? On a windswept ridge in the Blue Ridge Mountains, Marlon Loomis stood with his boots in the mud and his eyes fixed on the sky. The year was 1868. Loomis, a dentist by trade but an inventor by calling, had brought with him a bundle of copper mesh kites, reels of wire, and a conviction that the air itself could be made to carry messages and power. He let out the first kite, its silk wings climbing into the charged air, trailing a thin copper wire that stretched from his gloved hands to the clouds. At his feet, a bucket of water anchored the line, the copper dipping into the earth, a deliberate connection not just to ground the experiment, but to close a circuit between sky and soil. Loomis's setup was simple, almost stark. No batteries, no chemical cells, just a kite, a wire, and the natural tension between earth and sky. On his workbench back home, he had sketched the design in careful lines: aerial telegraph and electric generator. The United States Patent Office granted him patent number 122,660, and the diagrams survive: copper mesh stretched over a kite, a water-grounded tether, a galvanometer to measure the faint pulse of voltage that appeared as the kite rose. The results were plain enough for Loomis to record in his notes. As the kite climbed, the galvanometer's needle moved. At 30 meters, he saw a potential difference that climbed with every meter of height, echoing the field measured by Kelvin a decade before. Loomis claimed, in front of skeptical witnesses, and in the pages of Scientific American, that he could send a signal from one hilltop to another, miles apart, with nothing but air and wire. The press called it cloud telegraphy. Patent filings and newspaper clippings from the time capture both the ambition and the doubt. Loomis's own words, preserved in the patent application, describe a system for obtaining electricity from elevated conductors and transmitting signals without artificial batteries. The diagrams show a lattice of copper, a bucket of water, and the Earth itself as the silent partner. Whether the world believed him or not, the apparatus stood as proof that energy could be drawn from the sky, if only someone had the nerve to reach for it. In the late 19th century, a quieter revolution unfolded just beneath the ground. In towns from Ohio to Bavaria, municipal installers and tradesmen pressed copper and zinc plates into damp soil, linked them with wire, and watched for results. The outcome was simple but striking. A steady current measured on a galvanometer, enough to run a clock or send a telegraph pulse. By the 1870s, Scientific American published diagrams of these buried arrays, and city councils weighed their use for public clocks. The courthouse in Springfield, Massachusetts became a local marvel. Its clock ran for months on nothing more than 2 rods, copper and zinc, buried 4 feet apart in the courthouse lawn. The voltage was modest, half a volt here, a volt there, but the current was steady, reliable enough to wind a spring or close a relay, no chemical battery needed. Trade journals filled with debate. Some insisted the effect was chemical, a slow corrosion of metal in wet earth. Others argued for telluric currents, natural flows of electricity through the crust, perhaps driven by the same atmospheric forces that powered Loomis's kites. Letters arrived from rural postmasters and city engineers, each describing a different setup: zinc in clay, copper in sand, iron in marshland. The Telegraphic Journal published accounts of earth batteries strung along canal towpaths, each cell buried beneath a stone marker, each marker feeding a faint but persistent current to the telegraph office. For those who worked with these systems, the process was hands-on. Copper felt cold and slick, zinc rough and quick to tarnish. Wet soil meant more current, and dry spells slowed the clocks. Installers learned to read the ground, choosing sites by the color of the clay and the feel of the water table. The technology was open, local, and accessible. Anyone with a shovel and some scrap metal could tap the earth for power, no meter required. Beneath every city, faint electrical currents move through the earth, what geophysicists call telluric currents. These flows, shaped by the global electric circuit, are measured today using magnetotelluric surveys. Depending on the soil, current densities range from 1 × 10 to the -8 to 1 × 10 to the -5 amperes per square meter. In the Canadian Shield, the readings are at the lower end, and in the clay soils of the American South, they rise 100-fold. Copper sulfate electrodes, sunk ½ a meter into the ground, pick up these signals, their output echoing the daily rhythm of the atmosphere above. In the late 1800s, this grid was more than theory. Municipal engineers and telegraph installers learned to read the land, searching for the most conductive ground for their batteries and rods. The phrase "live earth" was literal. Pressing a copper plate into wet clay, paired with a zinc plate nearby, produced a steady current, enough to trigger relays, wind clocks, or send a pulse down a telegraph wire. The telluric grid was everywhere, quietly powering the first electrical experiments. Above, rooftops became part of the circuit. City blueprints from Boston and Philadelphia show 8-foot copper rods, 2 inches thick, mounted atop courthouses and city halls. Some called them lightning guards, but the wires running from roof to cellar hinted at another purpose. During a summer storm in 1884, William Thomson measured 15 volts across a 10-foot copper finial. Tesla's notebooks record 12 volts at 30 microamps from a wire antenna grounded to a copper plate after rain. Buildings became silent collectors, rooftops gathering from the sky, earth plates drawing from below. Blueprints, municipal records, and geophysical logbooks reveal a world where air and ground formed a hidden infrastructure, quietly harnessed before the roar of engines took over. Power did not flow only through copper wires or the damp soil beneath city streets. It moved through ledgers, prospectuses, and the quiet calculations of men who never touched a telegraph key. By the early 1880s, the rules of the game were changing. The scattered, Open experiments with earth batteries and rooftop collectors gave way to a new logic, one written in the language of capital. J.P. Morgan, already the dominant force in American banking, saw the potential of electricity not as a curiosity, but as an industry. In 1884, his firm underwrote the consolidation of the New York Edison Company, merging dozens of small outfits into a single centralized utility. The prospectus for that bond issue, printed on heavy paper and signed in blue-black ink, promised investors a future of steady returns, metered, predictable, and immune to the whims of weather or soil. Morgan's syndicate did not fund rooftop collectors or earth batteries. Their money built dynamos, powerhouses, and miles of thick copper cable. The flow of capital became as important as the flow of current. John D. Rockefeller, whose Standard Oil empire already controlled the price of light through kerosene, turned his attention to electricity's new frontier. By 1902, Standard Oil's annual report listed controlling shares in the Northern Electric Company. Rockefeller's directors took seats on utility boards from Boston to Philadelphia. The logic was simple. Electricity, like oil, could be metered, sold, and taxed. Free energy, drawn from the air or the ground, offered no such guarantee. Wall Street columns from the 1890s record the scale of these investments. The American Lighting Company's $50 million bond issue in 1895 had J.P. Morgan and Company as lead underwriter. Rockefeller's purchase of a controlling stake in the Boston Electric Illuminating Company was announced in the financial pages of the New York Times in June 1900. The numbers were staggering for the era. Tens of millions of dollars, entire city grids bought and sold in a single boardroom meeting. The financiers did not argue against the physics of atmospheric electricity. They simply ignored it, directing capital toward systems that could be owned, measured, and billed. The result was a deliberate narrowing of technical possibility. The quiet, local power of earth and sky was left to fade, replaced by the hum of centralized stations and the logic of monopoly. The world's energy, once as open as the air, now moved through the hands of a few. In the closing years of the 19th century, the verdict on ambient energy was written not just in ledgers and patent filings, but in the pages of the engineering press and the fine print of municipal law. Editorials in Electrical World and Engineering News began to appear with increasing regularity. Their language was not subtle. Atmospheric harvesters were called primitive contrivances, and earth batteries were dismissed as unreliable and wholly impractical. One 1887 column, unsigned but widely circulated, described rooftop collectors as unfit for modern service, warning that any city that relied on such methods would be left behind in the march of progress. Technical curricula followed suit. By 1892, the American Institute of Electrical Engineers had revised its recommended reading lists. Loomis's aerial telegraph, once a subject of debate, vanished from the syllabus. In its place were chapters on dynamo theory, alternating current distribution, and the mathematics of copper wire networks. Engineering News reported that the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, in its 1893 prospectus, dropped all mention of earth batteries from its laboratory courses. The message was clear. The future belonged to machines that could be measured, metered, and sold by the kilowatt hour. Municipal governments moved in parallel. Ordinance 1187, adopted by the City of Boston in May 1891, required all new electrical installations to be metered at point of entry. The language left no room for ambiguity. No unmetered or unregistered source of electrical energy shall be connected to the public lighting grid. New York City's 1894 building code went further, banning the use of earth return circuits for any purpose except telegraph signaling. The penalty for violation was steep. It included revocation of the installation permit and a fine that could bankrupt a small operator. For the ordinary citizen, the change was felt in the monthly bill and the new lock on the meter box. The quiet, open flow of energy from earth and sky was replaced by a system that counted every ampere, every hour. Dependence became routine. The gatekeepers, editors, regulators, and curriculum designers did not need to argue physics. They simply defined the boundaries of what counted as legitimate power and left the rest to fade into memory. Today, every flick of a switch draws power from distant, metered grids, while the quiet voltage in the air and earth remains untapped, hidden in plain sight. The hands that shaped modern dependence did so with intention, not inevitability. As energy crises deepen, the question lingers: what else have we surrendered for convenience and control? The silence between the wires may hold answers we're still not allowed to ask.